welcome. Still people walking in, which is wonderful. We'll let them float in. I'm Peter Reinhart. Thank you for coming. I think I have a schedule here. I'm going to just tell you, just so that you know, I'll get this out of the way, because once I get started on the sort of the stories, we may forget to come back to this. So throughout the next 4 days, I'll be floating around Expo doing a lot of appearances here and there. This year I will not be doing any cooking demos because we have so many other young, strong pizza makers and bread makers out there doing stuff that I'm going to let them carry the demo side. But I'm going to be moderating a panel on Wednesday that you're welcome to come, called Tinkering with Your Dough, with two pizza masters, John Arena, who many of you know if you're following any of the. His name pops up everywhere on all the pizza magazines, and he's been all over the world. And his pizzeria here, Metro Pizza, is world famous. And Brian Spangler, who has a Pizza Shoals in Portland, Oregon, consistently ranked in the top 10 pizzerias in America, one of my favorite pizzerias. And they're two guys that really understand the issues having to do with dough, specifically with dough. And we'll talk a little bit more about dough as I get into this talk. So we're doing that talk on Wednesday, let me see, just so you know, and it's all in your app, but just so I've mentioned it, that's at 9:30. I think it's going to be in this room at 9:30 on Wednesday. Yeah, tomorrow, of course, I'm going to be back in one of these rooms, not this one, 250, in room 250 at 8:30 for Chris Bianco's opening keynote. I want to hear what Chris has to say. I haven't seen him in a while, but certainly he's become one of the real poster boys of the artisan pizza movement. And then later on there'll be, at 9:30, Tom Gumpel will be in one of these rooms down this corridor, and he'll also be repeating his talk in the afternoon on the topic of good bread. For those of you who are here for the bread side, good bread is good for you. That's kind of a passion topic for he and I. I'm putting a symposium together in Charlotte, North Carolina this summer, and Tom is one of the key faculty members for that, doing a track that some of the people are going to choose between 3 tracks, and one of them will be a track on hands-on bread making for good bread is good for you, focusing on things like sprouted grains, freshly milled grains, things that enhance digestibility and kind of flip the script on the anti-gluten, anti-wheat, anti-bread movement out there, which has been important. I won't minimize how important it's been, but at the same time has put a lot of false information out and has put a lot of fear out, and we want to try to kind of reclaim the hero status for bread. While we're on that, how many of you here mainly were drawn here because of the Artisan Baking Expo as opposed to the Pizza Expo? So Artisan Baking, only a couple hands. So most of you are here for the pizza side, right? Pizza still is the draw. It's still the big star, right? Okay. How many of you came because it was a 2-for-1? I looked at that and went, whoa, a twofer. Okay, so let's see what else. Tuesday, then I'll be sitting in at the Lloyd's Pans booth just for an hour. I can't remember the time. I think it's around 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. But in between, there'll be demos on the floor by some really talented bakers. Cyril Hitz will be doing something on ancient grains on the artisan bread demo area. Peter Yuen, who many of you may not know, but is world famous viennoiserie expert, meaning the pastries, the croissants and the danishes. And he has kind of created a technique of making amazing croissants that have won him gold medals at world competitions, that he's going to show people how to do that lamination, I think at 10:30 tomorrow. And then there'll be other demos. Tony Gemignani, of course, will be doing one on Roman style. 9:30 on Wednesday will be the Tinkering with Your Dough with Brian and John Arena here, Brian Spangler. There'll be another keynote on Wednesday at 8:30, I think back in this room, with Sandy Mandel, who I don't know personally, so I'm looking forward to hearing that. It's a great example of somebody who kind of built a successful bakery. I know some of you are here who don't have pizzerias, but are in the process of moving towards that, so I think that's going to be an important talk. And then all throughout the next 4 days at the King Arthur booth, there's going to be all sorts of professional, like world famous pizza guys making pizzas and showing every possible style. There's going to be a lot of fun and games over there, and I'm gonna pop in at 12 noon on Thursday, if you're still here, for, I think they're calling it Stump Peter Reinhart. And they said it's basically like Jeopardy or something like that, or I'm not sure exactly what it's like. Wait, don't tell me or something. And supposedly there's going to be prizes, cash prizes. So, and it probably will not be hard to stump me, but I will do my best to either give you an answer or fake a really good answer, but I'll try to give you the real deal. And then on Thursday, that's Wednesday. Is that Wednesday? No, that's Thursday. Thursday at 12 noon. And then Thursday morning, for those, again, who are still here, I'll be doing in this room a presentation on the bread side based on these symposiums that I've been putting on in Charlotte, North Carolina, on the future of bread. And so this year's symposium is an outgrowth of the first 2 years, which were structured kind of like TED Talks. And so we had 10 speakers on really important subjects, all having to do with the future of bread, from the historical, the artistic, the technical, the scientific, lots of things on microbiology. And so out of those two, a lot of sort of themes emerged that became the key themes, the ones that we felt really needed to be delved deeper. So this year we're actually going to make product based on the academic presentations that were done the first 2 years, and actually see if we can push it to the point of coming up with prototypes. So one of the tracks will be strictly on sourdough, one will be on working with local grains, freshly milled grains, artisan or with ancient grains, and even some like rare, I'm trying to think of the right word for it, land race grains. So there's all that. That's all going to be one track, and the third track will be Tom Gumpel's track on Good Bread is Good for You. Richard Miskovich is also on that track, and he will be here during this event doing some demos as well. So there's going to be an interesting time, June 12th to 14th. We haven't sent out the ticket information yet on it. That'll happen in about 3 weeks. But if you have an interest in that, then just Google or do a search engine and go to International Symposium on Bread 2019, and it will lead you. We haven't even put the press release out yet, but in 3 weeks it will all go up there and tickets will go on sale in about 3 weeks. We expect they'll go fast. They're going to be pricey because we only have 60 ticket slots, 20 per track. And so, not everybody can come in June, but we have to be able to cover our costs. So it's going to be 60 tickets going on sale about somewhere around March 18th to 20th or something around there, 21st maybe. All right, so that's just sort of just in case we don't get a chance to talk today, and I'll hang around afterwards, but if you think of something between now and then, find me. I'll be floating around and you'll see me on the floor. Probably be wearing this red shirt over there, which was the official Pizza Expo shirt about 2 years ago. They gave it to me, and I loved it. It's so bright red and everything that I've been wearing it ever since, waiting for them to give us this year's shirts, but I don't think they're doing shirts anymore. So I'm holding on to that shirt. And then I usually have my Pizza Quest t-shirt on underneath, which has become a side project, a fun side project, which is sort of what we're going to talk about today, because it's grown into something that we really didn't know would happen or what couldn't predict. But it all goes back to this idea of this never-ending search for the perfect pizza. And I wrote a book about 15 years ago now called American Pie, My Search for the Perfect Pizza. I think we brought some copies at the Bread Bakers Guild booth. When I'm there tomorrow, I'll be sitting there signing copies if anybody wants that, or I brought a couple other books. We have them. I didn't bring a lot of books because I didn't really come here to sell books. But they asked me to bring some so that we could draw some people to the booth, and so feel free to come over, and you don't have to buy a book, but if you want one, we'll have them. And during that book, and I wrote that book in around 2003, and I know that many of you have been maybe to more pizzerias than I have. I've been to a lot, but when I run into somebody like Scott Wiener or some of the pizza guys here who go to Italy every year, and they come back and they talk about all the pizzerias they've been to, I feel like I've only scratched the surface of what's out there. But back in 2003, there really weren't that many distinctive pizzerias that went to, say, the next level, the level of what I would call the difference between good and great. So my definition of, well, first of all, I would say that there's, I start from the foundation that there are only two kinds of pizza. There's good and there's very good. And so the challenge was, what differentiates the good, which is 99% of the pizza that's out there, and the very good. And this premise goes back into 2003. Those numbers might have changed now. It may have been 99 and 1. Now maybe it's like 90 and 10, because there's so many more good pizzerias. Many of the pizzerias that have opened since then are not in that book because they didn't exist back then. Pizzeria Mozza, for example, Nancy Silverton's place in LA. Nancy was here last year. We did a panel with her. That didn't open until after the book had come out. But so many other places like that and of that caliber have opened since. So it felt like maybe I either have to go and write out sort of a follow-up book or come up with another way of continuing this quest for what differentiates good from very good, or in the very good category, we would say those were the ones who would fall in the category of perfect pizza. So then, of course, I created a challenge for myself because I had to define, well, what do I mean by perfect pizza? What do I mean by very good? What are those differentiations? Because these are just terms, they're just words. So what do they mean? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second, but let me just backtrack a little bit in terms of my own journey. Everybody in this room probably has an origin story on what drew you to pizza. What made you love pizza or artisan bread, but any of those things. So since we're defining pizza, so I say there's two kinds of pizza, good and very good. And then the other definition, we'll just use this as reference points that we come back to later, is that just defining what pizza is, which I define very simply as dough with something on it. A sandwich is dough with something in it. And so they're very similar. They're kissing cousins, but really that's all pizza is dough with something on it. And so why is it, the question that I was asking myself is, why is it that some people working with the same palette of ingredients, flour, water, salt, yeast, some sauce, some cheese, why are some people able to make pizza that breaks from the pack, that becomes destination pizza, that becomes, talked about, as opposed to all the other good pizza that's out there? Because all pizza, unless you burn it, unless you screw it up big time, is still good. Dough with something on it works. It's the perfect flavor delivery system, and in the end, that's why people eat. They eat for flavor. And nothing delivers flavor like dough with something on it or dough with something in it. I mean, a grilled cheese sandwich is just a variation of a pizza when you think about it in those terms. And it works. It's satisfying, and there's a lot of reasons why it's satisfying, but so the question was, okay, what is it that differentiates them? And then we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So I want to go back a little bit to my journey. Kind of begins in around 1957 or 58 when I was 7 years old, and my dad and mom heard about a place on the other side of the tracks, so to speak, from where we lived out in suburban Philadelphia, called Mama's Pizzeria. And how many of you are from the Philadelphia area? Anybody? A few of you? So you may or may not know. It's still there. It's on Belmont Avenue. But it wasn't at that time. It was in Manayunk, which before Manayunk was gentrified and turned into a little restaurant row, was a very tough neighborhood. And it was in this old, building. This is like a 1950s type pizzeria. And it was owned by husband and wife, Paul and Mary Castellucci, who we got to know because about once every week or every 2 weeks, my folks as a treat would take us to Mama's Pizzeria because we loved their pizza. And it was new. Pizza was kind of new to everybody back then. Philadelphia is not like New York where there's a pizzeria on every corner, certainly not back then. It was just coming into its own. That's my kid brother, Fred. He was like 16. He was always the camera hog, so he's going. That's my dad standing there to the left. I think that's my mom. It's hard to tell. She's in soft focus there. But that's the restaurant. It's just a few, Formica tables. Very often we were the only ones in there. Back when they first opened, they just made pizzas. And then shortly after, a couple years after we started bringing people there and other people discovered it, they moved to a nicer place in a little town called Roxborough, just a couple miles away. And then after about 2 or 3 years there, they moved over the river into the main line closer to where we lived on a street called Belmont Avenue, where they've been for the last 40 or so years, 45 years. And then they added in cheesesteaks and hoagies to their menu. Pretty much that was about it. They didn't do pasta, and most of it was takeout. There was enough tables for people to sit and eat there, which we like to do, but you could also take stuff out. But there was something about their pizza that I really, really loved. And by then we had tried lots of other pizzerias, and I was convinced that Mama's made the world's best pizza. My whole world was, the Philadelphia area. And a couple slices in New York on our occasional trips to the city. But it was certainly, to me, better than everyone else's. And their cheesesteaks were really, really good. I loved their cheesesteaks. And so we went there quite often. And by the time I was 16, I was even like a delivery boy for them. And I got to know Paul and his wife and his son, Paul Jr., who was just about 13 at the time. He was working. He would be there a lot of times just working behind the counter, helping his mom, making cheesesteaks. And that's Paul. Then, this is about again, this is when he was just starting out, probably, I'm going to say 1957, 56, 57. Paul sent me this. That's his wife, Mary. This was after they moved, I think, into their newer place. That's her more recently. And there they are today, all right? And they're retired, and there's a story about that. So meanwhile, I had kind of gotten this love of pizza, and I had gone off to college. I was in Boston. I was trying pizza at a lot of different places. I still, in my mind, was convinced that Mama's still was the benchmark for me of great pizza. And so every time I had pizza, I'd say it's really good, but not as good as Mama's. And I have a feeling that many of you have had similar experiences with your favorite place. And we all have a favorite place. So I called a place like that a perfect pizzeria, but I finally decided that there's two kinds of perfect pizzas. There is the kind of pizzerias that are perfect because that's where you hung out. That's the place that you went to with your friends. It was the best in your neighborhood. It was a place where maybe you took dates. Maybe it's the place where you got dumped. Who knows? It's maybe the place where you delivered. But there's places like that, and the pizzas were really good. So I call those contextually perfect, meaning they were perfect for you in the context of your life. And then I realized, as I got out into the world and started tasting pizzas at other places outside my comfort zone, that there's other pizzas that you have no history with, no context for thinking they're great, but there's something so good about those pizzas that they become perfect in that moment because they hit the paradigm of what a great pizza can be. So I call them paradigmatically perfect. I got very platonic about this, very, very much like they're perfect because they fulfill the paradigm of what great pizza should be. Great dough with something on it, but somehow better than everyone else's. And so, and I started to add some of the places like that to my list. I realized there are places like that, and I wanted to kind of be able to tell the story and find out what these places that were doing better pizza, what were they doing that differentiated them from everyone else. So I started thinking about doing a book, and then I was home visiting. I went home to see my mom and my brothers, and my wife and I got to. We got off the plane, and when we were getting off the plane, my wife Susan twisted her ankle. She kind of stepped funny off of the plank or whatever that thing is, the steps going down, and she really twisted her ankle badly. By the time we got her home, it had swelled up a lot. I got it to my mom's apartment, and we had to get ice on her foot, and she was like, eventually we ended up taking her to the emergency room. It was just a bad sprain, but she was up with her foot up on the sofa with ice on it. We had planned to go out to dinner with my brother Fred, and so I called him from her apartment, and I said, Fred, we're going to have to call dinner off. Susan's injured. We're not going to be able to do this tonight. He said, well, I got an idea. Why don't I bring a couple of pizzas and cheesesteaks from Mama's over, and we'll just eat in tonight? And I said, great. I haven't had Mama's in like almost 30 years. And because now we're talking about many years later. And so about an hour and a half later, he and his wife show up with 2 big cheesesteaks and 2 pizzas in a box. And we put them on the table, and I start to tear off the butcher paper from the cheesesteaks. And the smells are like bringing me back to when I was 16 years old driving the truck. Because when you drive delivering pizza, you are imbued with aromas that become taste memories. They become embedded in your brain forever. So and writers have called those taste memories, whether it's tasted through your mouth or the 80 to 90% of your experience of the taste and flavor is through the olfactory, and that smell was just totally distinct and different from other pizzas. The combination probably of the cheesesteak and the pizza in one place, it was like a flashback, total flashback for me, and I'm going, wow. And so I get the cheesesteak out, I take one bite of the cheesesteak, and the juices are dribbling down my chin, and the cheese is like coming out, and I go, hey Fred, these cheesesteaks are better than I remember them. And he just starts laughing at me. And he says, yeah. He says, too bad you moved away because we get these all the time. And I said, yeah. And so then I went over and had a slice of the pizza. And I went, wait a minute. I said, this pizza's not as good as I remember it. Something's changed. And he says, no, they haven't changed. It's the same as they've always been. I said, no, there's something different. He says, no, they're the same. And I said, no, they're different. And so he says, well, let me ask you something. What makes you think it's the pizza that's changed and not you? And that's when I got the idea for my book, for American Pie. I was going to write a book about whether it was me or the pizza that had changed. And in the course of trying to find that out, I would try to get to the bottom of what differentiates good from great. So, of course, we finished up, and it was great. And I started to work. I started the research phase of my book, and we went over to Italy. We went up and down the coast. We tasted as many places as we could squeeze in. Some of I started collecting lists. And again, this was before the internet was big, and you could get a top 20 list any day of the week to tell you to guide your tours. There was nothing quite like them. So we were creating our own based on places that people told me about or that I knew about. And of course, we went to Frank Pepe's. By then, I was working at Johnson & Wales in Providence, so we could just drive down to Connecticut. Went to Frank Pepe's, to Sally's, to Modern, the three iconic places. Along the way, we stumbled into other places that were great. Al Forno's in Providence, doing grilled pizzas. We started to collect a list of things, and I was beginning to make a list of what it was that I could identify that could help to define this paradigmatically perfect pizza that was so satisfying that you didn't have to have history with the place to recognize its greatness in that moment. And then to see if I could, and again, I still had no answer to, okay, how does it, what's the difference between those and the everyday pizzas that are just almost as satisfying, but not quite as distinctive. And finally, the word came to me. What is it that defines the great pizzas from the good pizzas? And the word was memorable. It was memorable in the same way that aroma in the car became a sense memory that 30 years later came back in a flash. Memorable in that you can't get that place out of your head, out of your mind. It's the place that you want to tell your friends about. When someone's coming to your town or asks you where can I get great pizza, you don't hesitate. You send them there. You talk about it, or you get a call from somebody saying, hey, have you been to Chicago lately? You got to go to Spaccanapoli. Well, why? Why is Spacca that kind of a place? What differentiates it from some of the other places that are doing good work as well? And I didn't want to err and disqualify places that might be great to other people, because we do have the contextually perfect places that people still love, validly so. Who am I to say that my criteria are better than yours? Because in the end, it's subjective, totally subjective, but I was trying to find something, a language to define, okay, what objectifies it and can help elevate it. Let me see what I got next. Oh, there's Paul Jr., Paul's son. At the time that I was delivering pizzas, he was there chowing down on the cheesesteaks. That's Paul now, Paul Jr. now. We'll talk about him in a second. There's him with some of his kids. So let me see what's next. Okay, so we're going to come back to that. Some of you will recognize that box. So let me fill in the gaps. So I went out and I started going to a lot of places. I went both to Italy, then all around the country, wherever we could. And again, it's not an exhaustive list. but I started to know what I was looking for. I knew what I could eliminate because I knew that they were going to be good but not memorable. I was trying to find the places that had established themselves for other people, not just me, as the memorable places and the must-go-to and can't get it out of my head places. And so, of course, one of those places was Pizzeria Bianca in Phoenix. Now, how many of you have been to Pizzeria Bianca? Still many of you not. Okay, is Chris here in the room? Hopefully not, so I can talk about him. But tomorrow you'll want to go see him. So at that time, now we're in the, it was like 2003, I had already been to Bianca a couple of years before when I was in a conference in Phoenix. I knew about him from around 1996 or so, 97, and his reputation was growing and growing and growing as being this must-go-to pizzeria. A New York guy who had transplanted, his family had moved to Phoenix, not a pizza mecca, and somehow people were talking about it as destination pizza. He was still flying under the radar, except in the chef community. Many chefs by 2003 knew about him. I had already been talking it up for a couple of years. I knew that that would be a place I had to go back to in my quest to find out whether it was me or the pizza that had changed, and to see if I could kind of zero in on what it was that he did that somehow elevated his pizza clearly to a paradigmatically perfect level. You know, very few people at that point, especially because, again, the whole pizza community was not where he was. Since that time, a lot of the pizza community has risen to the bar that he was then setting with a few other people. And so it was new. It was like a refreshing breakthrough. And so I got to spend some time with Chris. And I called him up and I said, I'd like to come spend a day with you, maybe make pizzas with you, sit down and kind of get into your head a little bit and talk about this. And he's very thoughtful and philosophical, and he doesn't like to talk about his stuff. He likes to just, cook. But if you can get him, at a table with, a couple glasses of wine, you could have a nice chat. And we got pretty deep into the conversation. And by this time, the word had already been out in the community. A lot of celebrities were now starting to come there. Chefs were having there was one famous woman chef from LA who had her wedding at Pizzeria Bianca. That's how good the pizzas were. It was a year or two after this interview that Pizzeria Bianca, Chris Bianca was awarded the James Beard Award as the best chef in the Southwest. I mean, all of a sudden Chris was becoming the poster boy, but it hadn't quite happened yet. And so we're sitting down and talking, and so I just asked him, I said, Chris, what is it? Well, first of all, in getting your pizzas to where they are, what are some things that you could teach another pizza maker? What are some of the tricks that you have that could help elevate their game? And he said, I don't think that giving people tricks on how to do things and my tips and tricks would do them a service. He says, I can give tips and tricks, but every pizza maker has their tips and tricks on how they make great pizza. He said, that's not what makes my pizza what it is. It's not what makes it, I'll use this word, memorable. It's why it's become the talk of the town. It's not it. I said, well, what is it? And he said, well, we make our own cheese. We pull our own cheese every day. I said, not at that time, nobody was doing that. Now a lot of people are doing that, but nobody was pulling their own cheese every morning. We get curds and turn them into mozzarella balls. And I said, well, that's pretty cool. He says, yeah, but that's not it. That's not what makes them great. I said, what else? He said, well, we grow a lot of our greens in the back. We have a garden, and I have farmers all around here that I get greens from. We buy locally as much as possible. We try to use local, regional. This was before the farm to table movement and the farm to fork and all that stuff. He was doing it. He said, yeah, that's not it. He said, we make the dough by hand. I don't use a machine. We actually mix the dough by hand early in the morning and give it all day to ferment. It's long, slow fermentation. It's a little wetter than most people are comfortable working with. He said, yeah, that's one of the things we do. Wood fire oven, that was kind of becoming, it hadn't quite come in fully at that point the way it is now. It was a harbinger of things to come. So we bake everything over wood, but I don't bake it in 60 to 90 seconds. I bake them at about 3.5 minutes, 3.5 to 4 minutes. For my style of pizza, I want them a little al dente. I'm not using Italian flour, I'm using American flour. It's a different thing I'm going for, but it is Neapolitan inspired. But it's you know, the way I like my pizza, with a little more crispness in the crust. I like it to stand out a little, stand up, and not just be folded over. I like all that. And he said, and I just like, you know, flavors. He said, but that's not it. So I said, well, what is it? What is it that makes your pizza so great? And he says, it's because, and he got really quiet because he's not a bragger. You know, he's the kind of guy that's like pretty humble. And he says, it's because I'm the one who's making them. He says, I can teach people my tricks, but I can't teach them to care as much as I care. If somebody came to me who cared that much, I could teach them to be a great pizza maker. But they're hard to find, people that care that much. Who knew back then that there were lots of people out there who were caring, they just didn't know what the next step was. And so we started to see, you know, over the next few years, this unfold, this sort of unexpected movement of artisanship. And it was prefigured by what was going on in the artisan bread world. Artisan breads had the same evolution, from Americans being sort of ashamed of their bread to wanting to know how the Europeans did it, to learning how to do it, to little by little, you know, forming a guild. The guild will have a booth here, finding bakers like Brian Spangler, who was a member of the guild, and Nancy Silverton, who was a founder of the guild, who were great bread makers, who then later transitioned over into pizza. And so I wrote, by the time the book came out, a year and a half later, some of these other places were beginning to pop up, but it was too late for me to write about them. But I still hadn't finished my journey. I mean, when Chris and I, when he said that about that he was the one that making it, I went, well, that's a really important, I made notes of that. And I said, so we talked a little bit more, and I said, so Chris, you know, you're out there, you know, you're making the pizzas, every pizza you're making. At that point, he was still making every single pizza. I said, you know, what is it that drives you? You know, why do you do this? And he said, well, for me, part of the joy is I like to communicate with the people. I get to interact with everybody. I'm there in plain view. I'm talking to my customers, and I'm feeding them. And I'm getting tremendous amount of joy feeding them something that they really like, that I feel proud of. He says, it took me 6 years before I had a pizza that I was really proud of. 6 years of being in business before I had a pizza I was proud of, until I locked and dialed it in. It was a learning process, but now I feel really good about them. And I said, yeah, but when they eat your pizza, what is it that you want them to experience? What's the experience you're trying to give them? And he got very, very quiet and kind of looked down, and he said, what experience? And he said this very slowly. He said, I want them to experience my soul. And the room got that quiet. And I waited for a few minutes, and not a few minutes, a few seconds. And I said, well, do they? And he said, do they experience my soul? He said, maybe yes, sometimes. He said, but enough talk. Let's go make pizzas. You know, that was it. We went about as far as you can go before. It's like, we can't talk about this anymore, because, you know, when you get that deep into it, when you start getting into the level of soul, and I'm a big believer in, you know, like the 4 levels of meaning of everything, and the deepest one being the mystical level of our souls. There's not too much. The more you talk about it, then you ruin the experience. That moment was so perfect, because I knew when he said that now I knew what my book was really going to be about. And that was one of the key distinguishing characteristics of what differentiated good from great, was having people that really cared who were making it. And it didn't mean it had to be only your place, or that it couldn't be third generation or anything else, but you had the caring came through, because people experience that care. I'll define in another word, that you love what you're doing. People are tasting the love. So, and it's subjective. The more you talk about it, the worse it gets. But that's what you're conveying. That's what you're transmitting through your actions. A product that is an embodiment of love, and people respond to that. Subconsciously, consciously, you never know. Usually more subconsciously, because who talks about this when they're eating pizzas? And what pizzeria guy do you know that says, I want people to experience my soul? Well, especially back in 2003. But little by little, pizzerias started opening up. The bar was raised. pizza makers were beginning to learn a lot of the same tricks that the bread bakers were learning about pre-ferments and long fermentation and natural versus yeast fermentation and how to use them in different ways, different uses of flour. More recently, a lot of with fresh ground milling. We'll see some of that here. You'll see a mock mill booth somewhere here where you can actually get a tabletop grinder, attach it to your Kitchenaid, and grind flour in your home if you want, or a bigger one that you can attach in your bakery. And there's other mills like that. So all these things have happened really only in the last 10 to 15 years. All of these kind of closing the gap. So that now when people go to Pizzeria Bianca, when I send them there all the time, when people say they're going to Phoenix, and I say, well, how was it? And they go, it was really, really good. It reminded me of this, and this. And suddenly he's not out so far in front of the pack because the pack has kind of caught up to him. He hasn't fallen back to the pack. The pack has come back to him. The whole ocean of pizza benchmarks has been raised, I think, which means it's harder and harder to keep up if you don't keep up. And that's why Pizza Expo is so important and other events like this, because this is where we're all going to share the tricks and the knowledge, but also you're going to meet people who are really passionate about it. And they're going to be people in some of these business workshops saying, look, if you're not obsessed with what you're doing, you might want to think about something else, because it's going to take that level of obsession, that level of caring, because that obsession is another way of saying caring too, depending on how you twist it. But all these things are so important. Is that mine? No, it's not mine. Oh, that's my phone, I think. Is that telling me it's time to stop? I'm guessing it is. I got a little bit of time. I don't think it's gone off yet. Sorry. Let's see what it's saying. Oh, I've still got 9 minutes before it'll really start beeping. So good, because it's going to be time to finish the story, because the story's almost finished. After I visited with Chris, I went to a number of other places and met with a lot of people. I went to Chicago and did the whole Chicago pizza thing, which is, they're just as proud of their pizzas in Chicago. How many are here from Chicago? Only one? No. You should be proud of being from Chicago, one of the best food cities in the world. And of course, the deep dish pizza phenomenon, really owes itself to the city. But also, there's lots of other kind of pizza in Chicago besides deep dish. And so I went there. I went out for pizza with Rick Bayless of the Frontier Grill, because I knew Rick. And we went on a little, I called them pizza hunts. We went hunting for pizza, and we sat down and we talked about these ideas. I told him about what happened with Chris Bianco. And he said, oh, you've been to Pizzeria Bianco. He said, I was going to ask you if you've ever been there. I said, have you? He says, oh, yeah, everybody meaning chefs like him. We all know about Pizzeria Bianco. It's like the best, And I said, oh, God, so it's not just me. He said, oh, no, it's really amazing. And he said, so now I was coming close to the end of all my research, and I came back to Philadelphia, passing through Philly on my way back to Providence, where I lived at the time. And I stopped at home. And when I got there, I called Mama's Pizzeria. And I said, is Paul there? Now, this is 2003 again. I said, is Paul there? And this guy answers, and he says, this is Paul. And I said, no, I mean Paul the owner, Paul Castellucci. He said, oh, you're talking about my dad, Paul Sr. He said, he retired 10 years ago. He said, this is Paul Jr. He said, nobody else in our family wanted to keep the place going except me, so it's mine now. This is my place. And I said, Paul Jr. I said, the last time I saw you, you were 13. And he says, yeah, I'm 43 now. And he goes, and yeah, it's happening here, And I said, so I told him I was writing this book. And he said, well, come on over. I remember you used to deliver for us, And so like this, again, time is compressed, and suddenly we're back, and I'm 16 and he's 13. And so anyway, I get over there, and I started telling him, I said, listen, I got to ask you a question. I said, have the pizzas changed since your dad retired? And he started laughing, and he said, so you noticed? And I said, I knew it. I said, they have changed, haven't they? And he says, oh, yeah. He says, when my dad was getting ready to retire, he was looking to find somebody who could make the pizzas as good as him and could handle his dough, which was a tricky little dough. It was his own dough. And he said, it wasn't going to be me because I don't like pizza. I don't make pizzas. That's not my thing. He says, my thing is cheesesteaks. I love cheesesteaks. He said, but but because he couldn't find anyone to handle the dough, he changed the recipe. He simplified it. He made it less sticky and a few other tweaks so that it was basically foolproof. And I said, yeah, but now it's just like, it's like everybody else. I won't give names of the franchise otherwise. It's like franchise pizza, And he said, yeah, but he says, but I don't really care. How could you not care? He says, because when my dad was here, 75% of our business was pizza, 25% was cheesesteaks and hoagies. And he said, now 80% of our business is cheesesteaks and 20% is pizzas, and we're making more money now than we ever did. In fact, I'm only open 4 days a week because I don't have to work, the other days because we're doing fine on the 4 days. And she says, don't you remember when I was a kid, I used to hang out with my mom at the cheesesteak station. We made cheesesteaks and hoagies. That was my obsession. I was really into it, and I learned everything I could from her, and so that's what I focused on. Well, it turns out that 2 weeks before I had stopped there, I read a newsletter by David Rosengarten, who was a food writer of note who did these issues on different themes, and he had done a cheesesteak issue. And he'd gone to Philly and throughout Pennsylvania looking for great cheesesteaks, and somewhere at the end of the newsletter he said, by the way, if you're looking for the best cheesesteak in Philly, don't go to Pat's or Gino's, the two famous tourist places in South Philly, which everybody in Philadelphia knows are two of the worst cheesesteaks places. He said, go to Mama's Pizzeria on Belmont Avenue. Don't get the pizza, get the cheesesteak. It's the best cheesesteak you'll ever had. As I'm telling him this, and I told him about this article that came out. I said, did you know he called your cheesesteak the best in the world? He said, no, I didn't know that. He said, I have no life. I'm just making cheesesteaks. I don't read stuff like that. I said, well, he did. He said, wow, thanks for telling me. I said, but you know what? When I had a bite of the cheesesteak a year ago, when I was starting my search, when I was doing this research, the first words out of my mouth were, these cheesesteaks are even better than I remember them. And that was important to me because they exceeded my memory. And so Paul has taken his cheesesteaks to another level, clearly, from where and they were always good. They were always they were tied for first in my pantheon back then with another place called Larry's Cheesesteaks. We used to have arguments with our friends, which is better, Mama's or Larry's, And I said, you can like them both, I'll take one from anywhere if it's that good. But now, Mama's was clearly on another level. So I said, so Paul, tell me what it is that makes your cheesesteak so good. And he said, we make our own rolls. We don't use Amoroso's rolls, which are good, but everybody uses those. We have our own recipe, and we have a bakery commissioned to bake our rolls for us. I think they're better. He says, but that's not really the difference. He said, we use ribeye instead of top round. Most cheesesteak places use top round. And I'm probably speaking to some of you probably make cheesesteaks, and you may have different ways. This is, again, the old style of Philly cheesesteaks, top round. I said, well, ribeye there, that's a better cut. That could make a difference. He said, oh, yeah, it does. He says, but that's not quite it. He says, we have our cheese blend, the cheese blend that my dad developed for the pizzas. It was mozzarella, a tiny bit of Parmesan, a little bit of cheddar. That was always our secret ingredient, was cheddar. And I used to love the cheese, the pizzas and the cheesesteaks for this cheese. They had cheese unlike any other cheesesteak place. Most cheesesteak places would either use, the creamy, the Velveeta type stuff, or they would use American cheese, or if you're lucky, provolone. But they had their own little blend, but they always put plenty of cheese on. And so I said, yeah, that cheese blend is great. He says, yeah, but that's not it. So I said, well, what is it? He says, it's because I'm the one who's making them. Yeah, where had I heard that before? That totally completed the circle. That's when what Chris Bianco said and what Paul said kind of came together, and I knew I had a book. I knew I had a story to tell. And so I kind of tied all those pieces together, and that's what I wrote about in American Pie. Now, back then, we had a limited number of places we could write about. Spaka hadn't opened. There's a lot of places, most of the wood-fired Neapolitan places hadn't opened at that point. A lot of other pizzerias. The Detroit pizza thing was still a big secret. There was only people in Detroit knew about that. I didn't even know about it when I wrote the book, so I never made the book. Buddies should have been in the book. I never got there for that. But that's what I've addressed that now, because now I have a new book coming out, and I've got some cards here. I've got a few cards. If anybody wants one, they're just announcement cards. The book won't be out till May 14th, but if you want a card, you can grab one. It's got a small photo of the cover called perfect pan pizzas. So I've addressed now, in the last couple of years coming to Expo, I've seen this surgence of pan pizzas, in Detroit being one of the leading. It's no longer Detroit's secret, right? And now we've got Roman style pizza. That's if you get a chance, check out the Roman style pizza here at the show. All of these are the next wave of pizzas, but all of them I still think still follow and adhere to what we discovered in the course of this book. There's people there behind it who just care passionately. You know, on the first video that we did on our website, Pizza Quest, I keep one video at the top of the page. If you get a chance, go to pizzaquest.com, and at the very top, the first link will be a video that we made called Pizza as Obsession. And we have a lot of people in there, including Tony Gimignani and Anthony Strong from Delfina Pizzeria, Nancy Silverton, a few, whoever we could get to at that point. Even Steve Rouse from Stanislaus Tomatoes shows in there, because we go to the tomato fields and shake down some tomatoes to see, you know, what they do there. And every one of them, the operative word was that the word obsessed came up over and over again. You know, they said you just got to be obsessed to be in this game, and each of them were obsessed with something else. Stanislaus guy was saying, we're obsessed with our tomatoes. The pizza guys were obsessed with their either their cheese or their method. There's my timer reminding me to think about opening it up for questions. He said, so we put this video up, and it's kind of a teaser video because it has little clips from all the other videos that we made. So if you watch that, you can get a taste. I was going to show it to you today, but we couldn't get to the internet. But it's kind of a little clip of what's going on out there in terms of this concept of pizza as obsession as a theme showing up through all the videos. So if you get a chance, and then if you want to, you go to the video, we call it Webisode Archive, and you can go back starting from the last page, work backwards from the earliest videos that we filmed with Nancy Silverton and then and Tony and a few other folks throughout, to some more recent ones. We've got Anthony Mangieri and other people who have that same. Since we started the Pizza Quest, it was to keep the story going, not in a book form, but in a video form. So we now have it there. We have it on a new network called Blueprint, which is an offshoot of the Craftsy network. For those of you who know about Craftsy, we took all of the small videos we made and consolidated them into 7 little longer, 12 to 15-minute videos, each one having, taking small pieces and tying them together. So we have a Nancy Silverton video, a Tony Gimignani video, Anthony Mangieri video. There's those, and you just have to go to Blueprint. You just got to put my name in, Peter Reinhart at Blueprint, and it'll lead you to that. And you can get, it's a subscription network. You can at least watch 2 of them for free before you have to make a decision. But the reason I'm mentioning Tony, because Tony is omnipresent here at Expo, is that Tony, one of the things that came up when we talked about this obsession for creating perfect pizzas and just being so committed to caring about stuff, was that Tony said, when we talked about this with him, he said, he says another way of saying that is that you have to honor or respect pizza making as a craft. It's really a craft, and you have to care about it. And he said, so that's why he prints on all of his boxes, respect the craft, as sort of his catchphrase. And I think this is yet another way of saying you have to care more than anybody else, because that's what respect is it's all about caring. So these are the kind of things that we learned on our journey. It's a never-ending journey, because what is perfection but always just out of reach? When I asked Chris Bianco if he'd ever made a perfect pizza, he said it's like hitting the perfect golf shot. It's just always one shot away, But he said, but I get really close. I get really close, and we all do. And so I hope that this kind of gives you some ideas as you begin to hone in on perfecting your craft and caring about it and bringing that sense of caring and finding people who care to come to work for you. And what I'll do right now is if anybody, we do have a mic. Yep. So DJ has a mic. If anybody has any questions, we've got a couple minutes left. Feel free to ask some questions, and I'll try to answer them. Otherwise, I'll hang out here afterwards. If you'd like to grab
just
a
raise
card,
your hand.
I've got these announcement cards here. Feel free to grab one of these. And if some of you have to go to other presentations. Let me just see, it's 1:18. Yeah, we still have about 10 minutes. Questions?
We got questions right over here.
All right. Good job. Thank you so much.
It's like Geraldo.
Thank you. Peter, it's not so much a question, it's an acknowledgement that you said what I've been thinking for a long time. Until you can teach someone or they absorb your passion, they will never rise to your level or even accept what you teach. And I'm having so much trouble with that. I have 2 people who can do it, and it blows my mind that I can stand next to 20 people a year, try to teach them how to do this, and they don't care. And a perfect example of that was in this room. How many people's phone went off and they still didn't check their phone and shut it off? You have to, like as in the words of John Arena, you have to give a shit.
Yeah.
Right? And if somebody's phone goes off and you see it, turn yours off. Yes, it blows my mind. The first thing I did was make sure mine was off.
Yeah.
Right? But that's the difference that separates us all. We can have 600 people in the room, only 50 will rise. So thank you for hitting on that.
Well, thank you. And also I'll say that I've learned as an educator, since I teach at a culinary school where I get a lot of 18-year-olds right out of high school, and if I were to judge where they're going to end up based on what I see the first year, I would feel despair because so many of them come in not having that sense of caring, or no direction. They haven't awakened yet as a person, as a human soul to what life can be. But I realize, having done this now for 25 years teaching, that each year we get to see them inch a little bit more towards that. And by the time they graduate, many of them, not all, but many of them have awakened and have tipped over. And all of a sudden they're on fire about something. And I tell them, if you want to achieve greatness at whatever you do, find one thing that you love and care about that. It doesn't have to be bread. It doesn't have to be chocolate. It can be whatever you love. And if you can tap into greatness in one category, that greatness will spill over into everything that you do. Because we see that happen with people who are great pizza makers are not just great pizza makers. They have an understanding of what greatness is, that memorableness and greatness, and everything they do is tinged with that sense of greatness. So thank you for that insight and for your
Peter,
comments.
I got some more questions over here.
Yeah. Right here. Over here.
Howdy. What would you say are the kind of, for you personally, the experiential elements of as you bite into one of the pizzas that is memorable? That are the things you're like, these are the things that are in common on a lot of these pizzas.
Yeah.
What's the textures and flavors?
So what are the common characteristics of that sort of fall into that help define greatness? Because I usually talk about that and I skipped over it. So when I took this writer Jeffrey Steingarten out we went on a pizza hunt in New York City, and we went to Dom DeMarco's place, DeFaro in Brooklyn, which at that time had a reputation of being the world's greatest pizzeria. And it's the same idea, one guy standing in the same spot for 60 years making pizzas. But while we were driving there, Jeffrey Steingarten, who's a very opinionated food writer, says, I just got to warn you in advance. He says, when I judge pizza, he says, it's 90% about the crust and 10% about the toppings. So I hope that doesn't bother you. And I said, well, it doesn't bother me. I'm a dough guy. I'm a crust guy. I'm a bread man. I'm a crust guy too. I think it's at least 80%. For me, 80% of what makes a pizza memorable is the crust. It's the quality of the crust. Because the toppings could be anything. Great toppings, phenomenal toppings on an average or basic dough are just that make an interesting pizza. But if you have a great crust and then just put sauce and cheese or minimal toppings, it could still be a memorable pizza. So there's something, the crust is where the memorableness really begins. It's one of the reasons why I think these Detroit-style pizzas have become popular suddenly, because they do have, when they're done right, and not all of them are done right, but they have a very great, this crunchy quality, this great hot buttered toast quality on the bottom. It's the crackle, the crumble. It's almost like eating toffee and it shatters in your mouth. Not all pizzas do that, but that's one type of crust that can make it memorable. A great Neapolitan pizza with that almost ciabatta-like puff around the edge, where the dough is caramelized on the outside, but creamy, almost custard-like on the inside. That's very different than a pizza that, like the college pizzerias, which are good pizzas, but are not memorable because they don't deliver that creaminess. They deliver a more of a bready quality that is good bread, but not great bread. And so while they're not bad, they're just good pizzas. They don't achieve that greatness because they're not getting into those subtle zones where the greatness lies. The greatness lies in not just in the bottom and the snap of the crust, but inside that thin little layer in the crust or in the edge of the cornicion where there's some creaminess. There's so many factors. And then, of course, good toppings on top. Quality, ingredients properly seasoned, getting good tomatoes, getting, not just any tomato. And different pizzas require different kinds of tomatoes. We talked to a guy, Joe Badia, at the Atlantic City show a couple of years ago, whose pizzeria was getting national acclaim. He was using New Jersey tomatoes on his, because he felt like, to him, being a Philly guy, that and the New Jersey tomatoes were to him what the San Marzano tomatoes were to the guys in Naples. They were his local tomatoes. That much better to get a fresh local tomato than to bring one over from Italy, because it spoke to the region he was in. So there's all these different philosophies at work. None of them are right, none of them are wrong, or more right or more wrong. It's like, again, how connected, and that's a word we didn't talk about before, but the sense of connectedness, which is what we saw in Bianca and in the cheesesteak guy and everybody really who's doing great pizzas, is they're connected to the process and to their ingredients in a way that you are getting a piece of their soul when you're biting into their food. But at the real literal level of what makes it great, I think that snap in the dough is a big factor, that first burst of flavor, and then the depth of flavor. So somebody like Anthony Mangieri at Una Pizza Napoletana, he's using sourdough as his leavening, and you're going to get a much longer finish in the flavor, which can be very positive unless you don't, it's just too sour. But that's something that not too many Americans have experienced until recently, and now many pizzerias are introducing sourdoughs to their crust. That doesn't mean a yeasted dough, regular yeast dough, isn't going to be memorable, because we've seen that it can be, but it's just redefining again, pushing the boundaries. So there's always room for pushing the boundaries, I think. I hope that it just touches on it, but I hope that helps a little bit.
Any other questions? Just kind of raise your hand. We got a couple minutes.
Let's do one or two more.
Peter, on that same topic about naturally leavened dough, do you have any good resources that you would like to share that would be a good resource tool for people that are wanting to start out and do some naturally leavened dough?
Let me see. Well, I write about it in all of my books, but then there's some other good books as well. Trying to think what would be where would be a good place. Well, there's some new books that have just come out. There's a new book called Sourdough by Sarah Owen. Sarah's going to be at our bread symposium, and she gets deep in. She's kind of one of the new kids on the block, so to speak, of sourdough. Jeffrey Hamelman's book called Bread, a Baker's Journal. Bread.
Does it tell you how to?
Yeah, it really goes. It's written from a professional's point of view. Bread. It's called Bread, and then the subtitle is A Baker's Journal or something like that. Jeffrey Hamelman. And what I would suggest in terms of where to go to get information, go while you're here to the Bread Bakers Guild booth starting tomorrow, number 447, I believe. There will be other books besides mine. There will be resources. The best place to go for those of you who really want to understand fermentation in dough is become a member of the Bread Bakers Guild of America. It is the single most important organization of the last 25 years in terms of elevating the quality of bread in America. And almost every great bread maker now, the ones that have emerged, are all members and have gotten a lot of their lift off from the access to the knowledge that's archived there. So yeah, so just stop there and that'll answer your question. Yeah. One more question. Anyone else? Should we call it a day? Thank you so much for coming here today, for being part of this. And come and see me throughout the next few days. I've still got some cards. If anybody wants a card, help yourself.